Hey there, welcome to the AI for SMBs show, episode 5. I'm here with JD again as usual. Hey JD, how's it going?
Hey, it's going well. How about with you?
Going great, going great. Another great week in the AI world, which something new did happen this week that kind of got us thinking about what we should talk about this week. And we kind of came to the conclusion that talking about AI for math would be a good topic. Again, coming from the business side of math. Obviously, we don't care about math professors doing calculus and stuff. We're talking about like business math, because I think one thing that probably a lot of people don't realize is that AI, oddly enough, is not that good at math. Is that right, JD?
Yeah, that's definitely right. It's kind of weird to think about that when you're talking with a computer that it might not be great at math, but that's like one of the bigger problems. Um, it can get close, but if you think about it, it's not really doing straight math. It's not doing computation. It's doing an association, right? And so if certain numbers are associated a certain way, then that's how it's kind of pulling back this information. So uh, a good way to think about that is if you wanted to do math in like an AI chat, you actually have to give it a tool that says like, hey, use this calculator when you're facing math. And we have kind of like talked about tools previously where you can kind of like add those in as APIs and different things like this. Um, and so that's kind of what it would be, is like leveraging a tool like that, or in tools like OpenAI. It has this idea of a multi-model and the ability to approach it where you can generate an image, or you can read an image, or you can put together a table, or you can start doing some sort of data analysis. um, but a lot of what happens behind the scenes is it's trying to write programs or functions to actually interpret how this math is supposed to be done. So there's like a lot of different tools, functions, and different LLMs that have tried to approach this in like different ways.
Okay, interesting. I mean, maybe before we get into all the different options here and where this is going, I know a lot of people, including me on a smaller scale, have been using, say, just regular ChatGPT for doing math in the sense of, or what we would think of it as like spreadsheets and parsing data, right? Telling it, hey, let me upload this Excel sheet and tell me blank information, right? So that is something it actually is at least pretty good at. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, when you want to like, but it can still get confused. And if you look at like the guts of what a CSV is, or an Excel sheet is, it's really just like you have a value, and then you have a comma, and then you have another value, and that comma is what separates the two values, and that's what builds essentially the table. That's what CSV stands for, comma separated value. And so really, like, there's all this extra information, and an AI might not necessarily know to like pull that information in and parse it correctly, the same as it would as if you were using something like Python, where it's actually made um, to go out and take this information and build charts and things like that. So the accuracy might be off, and that's where it's you almost need like more fine-tuned examples, or even like different tools like we're mentioning, to actually integrate with it. So you can actually pull in a CSV. I'm not saying that you can't. I'm just saying there's a chance that the math that it's trying to do could be inaccurate, right?
Yeah, and that, we've talked to some people who are in, say the financial space, where mixing up one number out of 5,000 that they were dealing with could be catastrophic, right? And so coming back to this hallucination problem, or hey, this is really good, it gives me great info 80% of the time. Again, depending on your use case, that may be fine, and especially if you would easily catch the wrong number, right? All of a sudden it says it's 1,000,000 and it could never be over 1,000. It's not a big deal. You saw it, you changed it. But I think where what you're saying is that it can do the decent, quick kind of spit out some information. You're asking it one number to compare to another, but that's something very, very basic on the math for business side, as opposed to really detailed calculations, right? Really getting into the weeds. And that's where it just can't do that,
Right,
The
and
basic
you're
problem.
also running into like the problem of maybe you're sending a bunch of different data at it and then trying to do calculations on the fly. The chances are it can get confused. We've seen a lot of great tutorials where like, it's helping my kid with math and becoming like a math tutor. And I'm not saying that it can't do those things, but if you're talking about doing like a financial analysis for a business, that's where it's getting very complicated in regards to math. And so that's where like a lot of these different tools and different LLMs are like trying to solve that problem, right? Like you have Microsoft Copilot, which is like an assistant. You have the Google Sheets assistant. So where they're like trying to build templates that are within like your spreadsheet, and they're like hyper focused on making sure that those functions run correctly, or that the template is set up correctly, or it gives you a quick start. But if you're talking about like we've seen examples of like detailed financial analysis on like stock trading and things like that. You need extra tools in order to do the computation for the math.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's get into it then. So we know that ChatGPT can do some basic stuff, pretty simple things, and can be pretty good at that. But as you get more complex, the harder it is for the basic LLMs that we all kind of know and use to do. But what I think a lot of business people and a lot of people in general don't know yet is all this development, like you said, that some companies are doing to solve this obvious massive problem, right? I mean, the ability to do really complicated math in a financial sense would be insanely valuable, right? And so there's many companies who see this opportunity. Again, talking about whether it's Microsoft or Google already just putting, some versions of this into their spreadsheet tools. But there's even companies trying to build their own LLMs specifically to solve this problem, right? So maybe is that something that we should talk about? I know one of the big ones is called Cohere, right?
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about what Cohere is and does.
Yeah, so Cohere is it's another LLM, but their almost like niche is it's specifically looking at how it can help businesses in financial situations. So when we've looked at like different types of agents, we've looked at agents that maybe use Cohere to if you were going to do a business plan and you wanted to do a financial forecast. That type of LLM might be better than something that like Claude or GPT, where they're more focused on like content or specific multimodal tasks of like being able to upload a spreadsheet, see some of that data and interact with it, because they're solving two different problems, right? And if you think about the underlying power of like a spreadsheet in general, you have all these functions that are supposed to be doing computation, but even there's differences between Excel versus Sheets. Some functions don't run the same because they're different kind of operators, and so you almost have to like fine tune these tools to understand like the environment that you're in. And so that's where Cohere has shown that like they're more business oriented than and hyper focused in that niche. So there's a lot more like LLMs that are coming out. There's even one like Mistral is another LLM, and that LLM has started Mathstral, which like just came out, and it being very focused on like just solving the math problem. You and like to put this into kind of like some sort of relevance or whatever is like the there's a lot of different AIs that are helping with coding, and coding is like really well documented. It has like best practices and things like that. And there are still AIs that are being hyper focused on programming. They're trying to do the same thing with math because math is like hyper specific. It's very computation heavy. It's not done by like association. And so you kind of have like different tools going after different niches, I guess I would say.
Yeah. And that makes sense. It's one of those things, if you think about it from a business perspective in terms of the business of LLMs, just like anything, you can't be good, you can't be great at everything, right? And so if you think of Claude and ChatGPT and some of the big ones, Gemini, they are trying to be kind of the everything LLM that does a lot of things, but certain parts of what those things that it does are not going to be as good because they're not focused on it, because that's just, you can't focus on everything, right? And so we're going to have these broad LLMs like that. And then you get into something like Cohere, where it's like, hey, okay, we're not going to be able to do, anything about travel or whatever else because we're putting all our energy into business and the finance side where it doesn't make sense for a large model like ChatGPT to do that because then that takes away the power from the other aspects of it, right?
Yeah.
How would you explain that?
Well, you can almost think of it as like, let's just take OpenAI. So OpenAI has a single model for GPT-4 O. And what's happening there is you almost have like different sections or different models kind of coming together. An example of that is like when AI first started out, you could really just do text, right? And then you had Dolly, and that was their image service, but they weren't together. You almost had to like go to a different area to use the Dolly system. Those were really two different AIs that weren't communicating together. And so now with like GPT-4o, you have like this multi-model approach where you still have that niche or focus of a particular model, but you also have the ability to combine all of these together so that they're able to communicate. And so that would be like an example of like how we've kind of progressed from where we were just starting out with text and now we're doing images. We'll even see things with like videos where you have like they're hyper focused, but then they'll start to come into like the more multi model or like you just have to ask one thing and it'll know what you're talking about and go call out to another model. And so what I think will be interesting with like all these tools and these um, like hyper focused kind of LLMs is you'll have the ability to access them directly, or you have the ability to kind of do like a broader approach. Because if you're doing the broader approach, like that base and the amount of parameters and like information that it's trained on is way larger. Or if you're doing something like hyper focused, and we're talking about like an LLM that's specifically for spreadsheets and it's specifically designed to focus on math, that could be much smaller and actually may potentially run on a phone or potentially run in like different areas of like where you can just use it just for that sole purpose as opposed to working with like a much larger LLM.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and that is interesting. How I remember when Dolly came out, right, and it was this weird thing. You had to go somewhere else, and I feel like it maybe even had its own login, and it was like really annoying. And then all of a sudden, one day, you go into ChatGPT, and I don't know how I knew this, but saw it somewhere. Oh, you just say, "Hey, make me an image of something," and it just pops up right there in the chat. But
Right.
the reality is that you're saying those are two different LLMs essentially, but they're in one chat.
Yeah,
Is that a way to think
I
about
don't
it?
even know if they're like two different LLMs at the end of the day. It's almost like the way I think of it is you must have like LLMs that are communicating and distributing tasks. So when we think of like, you have a single entry point that says I'm answering a question, and then I'm recognizing, oh, you're trying to do this. That means I'm going to send you on to this other hyper focused thing. We do the same thing with like multi agents where you also have like a squad, sometimes they're called, of agents where like you have an intake agent, and then that intake agent says, oh, you're looking for this, I'm going to pass you off to this expert. We kind of do the same thing, and that's how I kind of think about it is you have like these hyper focused niches of LLMs that can be very fine-tuned, very granular on a specific task.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the broader scope, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so then the chat, however you call that you're in, knows where to go find that information, right? Again, coming back to what we talked about last week of a tool that the chat knows, okay, you could theoretically have 100 tools, not just Dolly and one other thing in a video
Right.
thing. You have like 100. And then the
Mhm.
chat knows, oh, you asked this because it's smart enough to recognize what you actually want. And then it knows what connections it has to maybe 100 tools. And then it can go to the tool that it needs to bring you back the information that you requested.
Yep, exactly.
Which is just extremely powerful, right? And I feel like we're at the very beginning stages of this, right?
Yeah, I think like the tooling part is still kind of becoming known of like the way to extend these applications, and then like I just like the math idea behind it because everyone kind of gets thrown off by the fact that like wait, what, a computer is bad at math, and it's really more of like what the computer is doing to try and like pull these similarities together, that it could mess up, right? What goes back to the whole hallucination part. And so by adding tools that are very specific at certain things, you almost give it like expanded knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's amazing. So yeah, let's go over the other one that I think you already hinted at a little bit. So there was an article, I think it was what got us to talk about this week, is the spreadsheet LLM. That was it. I think it was Microsoft that announced this. So maybe
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about what they're announcing there.
So this is kind of going into the weeds. They basically announced that they're through like a scientific paper that they're focusing specifically on what they're calling spreadsheet LLM, and it's basically a paper that's talking about how they need to be able to like parse different types of information in order to access like and process a spreadsheet, right? Because if you almost think of it like a spreadsheet is essentially a database, very similar and people use them as databases all the time. And so it's still early stages of like what spreadsheet LLM can do, but the point almost is that even large companies are focusing on the fact that this is a problem and a niche that needs to be solved. And the fact that so many people, especially businesses, are using CSVs and Excels and whatever else that are like this cell-based column system, uh, it's really important to pay attention to of like what's going on in the space and how to leverage it. So as far as like spreadsheet LLM specifically, it's not necessarily something that's in production, but it's something to pay attention to, where of like how are we moving in this direction of being able to interface with different systems and interface well so that you can have better accuracy, in this case specifically around numbers, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Did they give any sort of timeline on this? I think.
No, not like a specific timeline. It was more, especially with like the scientific papers, it's more of like research done, and you can almost see it as like a starting point of this is going on. Like other people are going to pick up on that paper and see what else they can do with it. So you'll see a lot of like probably individual or smaller companies that are focusing on this particular technology and then niching into that of how like they could build a SaaS around that. So you can think of it as like maybe there's a SaaS company that'll pick up the spreadsheet LLM and then actually make it for a niche for small business.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, I think that you can pretty much count on this happening and this becoming a big thing at some point, right?
Yeah.
Which is really exciting. Okay, so now let's talk about another angle that we're looking at on leveraging these tools that we've kind of been talking about, specifically Cohere, which is leveraging multi-agents with these math or business LLMs, right? And so one of the things that we've been looking into is the concept of building a financial agent, leveraging Cohere to dig really deep into financial systems, whether it's related to the stock market, whether it's private companies, documents. I mean, the main thing that we've been looking at is the 10K reports of public companies, which are a quarterly report that all public companies have to release. And so the idea being, can we ingest a ton of these reports, especially, they release them every 90 days. So companies been around, 50 years. That's, 200 of these reports. And these reports are, I think, over 100 pages on average, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea is, okay, ingesting an insane amount of data from these 10Ks and then being able to leverage the detailed math to be able to create reports or answer questions and build some financial modeling off of these reports that is just hyper detailed, specific, quality, and then also projections, right? And so it's a pretty exciting. I know there's a lot of people probably, related to the Wall Street space working on this, but again, it applies in so many areas. It's going to be an insanely valuable thing when this can be cracked, and it is something that we're looking at right now. Tell me your thoughts on this concept.
Yeah, I think it's important to draw the line between doing predictive like stock analysis and kind of looking at like the 10K as well as like in order to like do those kinds of predictions, it almost feels like there's two separate models that you would be using. You would want something that is checking a news feed and seeing if anything was released, any news was released that might interact with how the stock may go up or down. Those are things that are completely unrelated to math, right? Like where you're we could even talk about like an outage, right? The outage, like the CrowdStrike outage probably caused some disruption. Like that alone, like there's predictive analysis around that based on like contextual documentation. But then there's also like you mentioned like the 10K reports that are coming out, which actually have like a ton of finance data in it. And so being able to use different LLMs for different tasks um, is really important, where you might use OpenAI for like the news feed, and then you may use Cohere to go look at the financial data based on the fact that it can also call the 10K API, pull that information in and do an analysis, and then use both of those or a completely different AI like Claude to interact with the um, actually building the report and how you want it laid out. So I think it's kind of an interesting space where it doesn't necessarily have to be predictive stock analysis. Is this going to go up or down? It can also be on historical financial data to understand where is the company at from uh, from like their financial data. So.
Yeah. I mean, that just sounds amazing. I mean, the fact that you're talking about the multi-agent side of, okay, Cohere is great at the financial data and Claude is great as a writer, and, you know, OpenAI is great at whatever they're great at. And you can kind of mix and match these things, really, right? And that's where the multi-agent aspect. And then, of course, we've talked about before, is you can have a supervisor, right? Who's kind of in charge of each of these tools to do their jobs that you tell it in advance. And what that's really giving you is the ability to leverage the best of each option, as we just talked about,
Mm-hmm.
right? And put them all together. That's just amazing. But I love what you're talking about of the ability to say, okay, maybe we have one LLM or with a tool is monitoring social media or is monitoring the web for news articles about a change or something that happens, and that can be cross-referenced to the other LLM doing, you know, monitoring the stock market or monitoring past situations that were similar. Again, like you said, with the CrowdStrike thing, I can't remember the last time this did happen. I know it has happened where a bunch of businesses get shut down because of some sort of IT problem, right? How has that affected the stocks of those companies the day that those things happened, right? And we can put all of this together. That's just incredible.
Yeah, and you can almost have one agent that is using one particular LLM that outputs a document as a report, and then you have another LLM that's documenting this report, and then another LLM that puts another report, and then a totally different agent that knew nothing about what these other three agents were doing. They just look at the output of the report and have a specific task of saying, okay, based on all the information that I've collected, I've done my analysis, and I think blah, right? And so they're it seems very complex. It is pretty complex, but when you think about how you would make up a team, if you associate like that's how you would create these multi agents, the same way as you'd have a department for this, and that department might be Claude, and then you have a department for financial, and that might be Cohere, and then you have a department for whatever, and that department might be using a model that's OpenAI, and then how do they all communicate together? And you can use automations to take whatever those reports are and pass them around, or take different sections. And there's a lot of different automations that you can do, which I think is really interesting in the whole multi-agent space.
Yeah. And this is where just to stepping back of where things get really exciting, but also, you know, depending on your angle, pretty scary, right? Because what you just described is, hey, right now I have 5 employees. Each one has their specific tasks, they, you know, or their entire department where they're in charge of all the things they need to do for their department. And what you just described is that AI can basically do that.
Yeah, I would be hesitant to say like AI can take over that whole department. I don't know that I would say that. I would almost think of it as like AI if you structure your AI as the same way you would a department, you're still going to have to have like humans in the loop, right? So even with like the financial data, right? Like whatever it comes back with, it needs to come back with something, and that someone should probably say like, no, this is still incorrect. I've double checked the numbers, like this is incorrect. It's flagged as incorrect. Like go back and try again. And it's going back out and doing a lot of that accumulation of data and bringing it back to whatever employee that you have in order to make that decision, not necessarily like make the decision for you. That I, you know, would you do that? I mean, I guess maybe. I don't know that I would suggest it though.
Yeah, of course. I think maybe the better example of what I was trying to say is, okay, maybe instead of, hey, you have one person, now you're going to have zero. The realistic probably answer to this is, hey, you had 3 people per department, right? So you have 15 people in 5 departments. You could, again, not today necessarily, but once this is, I'm trying to predict the future here, that as this gets better and better, instead of having 3 people in each department, you'll have 1, right? Where 2 of the 3 people's works will be done by all of these agents doing everything. And then you'll have the one supervisor who knows how to check what they're doing, who has really good judgment, who can actually be the one to push things forward after they kind of do a lot of the grunt work. The AI does a lot of the grunt work. Would that sound more realistic?
I think when you start talking about like the grunt work, that's where I think it makes a ton of sense. I think like and predictions of the future, we see a lot of stuff with like the, where we're going, and OpenAI even released like some statements on like the different levels of AI and where we're at. And I do think we're like moving in that direction. I think that I almost always think that there will be some level of human in the loop. And when we start talking about like workplace disbursement and things like that, it's where would we put people to make it more beneficial for the business than doing the grunt work that was previously being done, because there's still opportunity for humans to be in this process. Like, and that's where I'm not really a doomsday type person when it comes to AI. I think there's a lot of benefit that we have to be careful with. We absolutely have to be careful with it. But I think it can be used as a benefit that we should be aware of. And how do we do it in a safe and secure way, is especially when we're talking about the math, is like important, right? I would not have an AI do my banking for me yet. I'm pretty sure I want to know what's going on there. So, but it would be nice to be able to know, like, alert different types of alerts that, like, as an email comes through and notices a change in my spending behavior, like something going on, like adding support there. I think that would be interesting. Or anyways, I'm going off a little bit of topic, but
it's important, because this is the big conversation, right? That almost everybody hears on, what they talk about on the news, right? They don't talk about anything that we've talked about up until now, which is the world going to end because 80% of people are going to be out of a job? And a lot of people do seem to believe that. I don't believe that either. I think you're absolutely right. I think throughout history, this has been said, for the last 150 years, that every time a new invention or something comes, it's going to, cause all those jobs to go away. And what ends up happening is they're right. Those jobs go away, but then other ones come up, right? So again, I know this one's a little bit scarier of like, well, what could they need to do, But again, we just don't know yet. But being optimistic about this stuff has always proven right. And I'm not sure why we think it won't this time. So again, like you said, a lot of the grunt work, people don't like doing it. That's why so many people are unhappy in their jobs, because the things that they're doing suck and they're boring. So if all of a sudden they only got to do the exciting, the fun parts, maybe not every second's fun, but you have a more meaningful, really, that's the better term, right? It's not fun. Is it about meaning? Do I feel good about myself that I'm accomplishing something important, where, paper pushing, you don't feel that way?
Right? Yeah, I think, and I don't remember who said this, but it's been around the internet where, like, someone said, I don't necessarily want AI to do my creative thinking for me. I want it to do my dishes, right? And like, that's if we start focusing, and people in small businesses start focusing on, like, what are the tasks that give me 30 seconds back? Those are the things. And when we start talking about, like, even some of these math techniques and things, like, really that's what we're getting at, is like, if I was able to get like financial summary in 30 seconds compared to 3 hours, like, where would that benefit me? And where would that free 3 hours up for me to go focus on another task that is probably equally significant? But the fact that it gave me 3 hours back means that I get to focus on, like, some of the creativity of how I'm going to do this pitch deck, and how am I going to communicate with the potential client, those kinds of things, which you can even practice with AI on. But
Mhm.
Those are the kinds of things that I think when we're looking at like uh, AI and even like these niche down approaches to some, in this case, like math and financial information, like where does it give me 30 seconds back?
Mhm. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And as I've been talking to more and more business owners, that's what they're talking about, right? Is like, hey, this thing that I do, it takes 30 seconds, it takes 10 minutes, it takes 30 minutes, and it's not the end of the world, but I do it, 5 times a day, 20 times a day, every day.
Mhm.
So can you solve it, even if it costs a little bit more than maybe you'd want to pay up front? It's kind of like an upfront cost when we're talking about specifically like a lot of this automation type stuff, but you're going to get all of that back in perpetuity. A lot of them start to see the value in that and get excited for them and for their teams to be able to automate that stuff that they don't like to do away. And this is becoming a big industry right now, right? Of helping business owners, because it is kind of difficult, right? And for some people it's extremely difficult, but it at least is somewhat of a difficult thing. But to know that can just be offloaded to somebody who's an expert on it can make your business so much better, not just technically, but also making your team happier, which is likely to be as big, if not a bigger value add to your company.
Yeah. This just popped in my head too. Like another thing when we're thinking about hallucinations and like the whole idea of like AI is not great at math is if you use AI in customer service or in like the appointment setting calls or any of the things that we've been talking about, if your privacy policy and like refund policy or whatever aren't like set up to handle AI and your AI proposes something like, oh, I can give you 100% off because I did the math and it was incorrect, though your company is, we've seen instances where the company is still has to honor what the AI has come up with. And that's where like another instance where, getting the math right is so important. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those stories are crazy. Um, but yeah, that hopefully those are kind of stories that will be in the history books at some point in the near future when these LLMs come up and they can solve that problem. So, um, hey man, this was a great one. Great job on this. I know this stuff can get a little in the weeds, especially math. Man, who wants to talk about math? But we all know how important it is, right? Especially as business people, you may not want to look at your financial statement. You may not like doing your taxes and all this kind of stuff, but the ability for that's why what we're talking about is so important, right? Because
yeah,
hopefully as AI gets better at this, you won't have to think about a lot of it anymore, or at least you only have to think about it at the high level and not in the weeds. So
exactly.
really good stuff. But all right, so feel free to reach out to us if you want to chat anything AI. We're here and available, but otherwise we'll see you on the next one.